Imagine being the most feared predator in the galaxy, only to discover that somewhere out there, on a small blue planet you've never heard of, lives a species so terrifyingly effective at war that they've turned violence into an art form. Now imagine being the bureaucrat who has to explain to the Galactic Council why this harmless species just completely destroyed the most advanced military force in known space, using primitive chemical rockets and what they cheerfully call really big explosions. This is the story of how humanity accidentally became the galaxy's most terrifying legend, and why the phrase humans are space orcs is now whispered in fearful reverence across 1,000 worlds. Welcome to the day the galaxy learned what happens when you mess with Earth. Ambassador Zekthara had seen many things in her 3 centuries of diplomatic service to the Galactic Council. She had negotiated peace between the crystal beings of Zirion Prime and the gas dwellers of the nebula sectors. She had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of new civilizations, and the extinction of others. But never, in all her years, had she seen the council chamber in such complete and utter chaos. The massive hall, carved from a single piece of crystallized starlight and capable of holding representatives from over 12,000 species, buzzed with panic, confusion, and what could only be described as barely controlled terror. The usual elegant chatter of diplomatic discourse had devolved into what humans might recognize as the sound of a disturbed beehive, if that beehive contained creatures from across the galaxy and several of them had multiple heads. At the center of the chaos stood Fleet Admiral Koroth, the pride of the Draconian Empire's military might. His usually pristine scales were dulled with stress, his forearms gesticulating wildly as he tried to explain the inexplicable to a crowd that refused to believe what they were hearing. The 7-foot-tall reptilian warrior, whose species had conquered half the galaxy through sheer military superiority, looked like he had aged a decade in the past few days. Order! Order! The voice of High Chancellor Vexnari boomed across the chamber, her crystalline form pulsing with authority. The ancient being had presided over the Galactic Council for over a millennium, and her word was law among the civilized species of the galaxy. Slowly, reluctantly, the chamber fell silent. Admiral Koroth, please repeat your report for the record. And, this time, perhaps you could explain how the most advanced military force in galactic history was, what was the term you used? Completely obliterated by a species we classified as barely sentient? Korotha's throat sac inflated and deflated rapidly, a sign of extreme distress in his species. Honored Chancellor, esteemed representatives of the Council, I understand your disbelief. I would not believe it myself if I had not witnessed the sensor recordings with my own eyes. He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. 47 hours ago, the Draconian 7th Fleet, consisting of 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, 134 destroyers, and over 300 support vessels, entered the Sol system to begin standard pacification protocols on the planet designated as Earth. A murmur ran through the chamber. Earth was barely worth mentioning in galactic terms. It was a small, unremarkable world in an outer spiral arm, inhabited by what their surveys had identified as a primitive species that had only recently discovered space travel. Their technology was laughably basic, their society chaotic and violent, and their military capabilities were estimated to be several thousand years behind current galactic standards. The planet's inhabitants, who call themselves humans, had been flagged for observation due to their unusual proliferation rate and their tendency toward aggressive behavior, Koroth continued, his voice growing steadier as he fell back on military protocol. Standard procedure called for a demonstration of force, followed by negotiations for peaceful integration into the galactic community under draconian oversight. It should have been routine. Ambassador Zekthara leaned forward in her biopod. She had always been curious about this particular species. Unlike most of the galaxy's inhabitants, who had evolved on relatively peaceful worlds with few natural predators, the humans had emerged from a planet that seemed actively hostile to life. Their homeworld was a nightmare of extreme weather, tectonic instability, and an ecosystem that appeared to have been designed by some sadistic deity with a sense of humor. Everything on Earth either wanted to eat everything else, poison everything else, or explode when touched. What was the human response to your arrival? Asked Counselor Thyssek, her insectoid features clicking with curiosity. Korotha's expression darkened. At first, there was no response at all. We positioned our fleet in high orbit and began standard broadcasting procedures. We transmitted the universal greeting protocols, followed by a demonstration of our technological superiority. We destroyed several of their primitive satellites and vaporized one of their smaller moons to show our power. Still nothing. Perhaps they were too frightened to respond, suggested Representative Gloop, his gelatinous form rippling with amusement. That's what we thought initially, Karath replied grimly. So we waited. And waited. For 6 hours, there was complete silence from the planet. No surrender broadcasts, no pleas for mercy, no attempt at communication whatsoever. Finally, we received a single transmission. The holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be a human male, middle-aged by their standards, wearing some sort of official uniform. The being had the typical human features, bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes that marked them as predators, and skin that was pale pink with patches of brown fur on the face. What struck the council representatives was not the alien appearance, but the complete lack of fear in the creature's expression. "Greetings," the human said in perfectly translated Galactic standard, though his tone was casual to the point of being insulting. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We've received your demonstration of power and your demand for our surrender. After careful consideration by our leadership, our response is as follows: no." The chamber erupted in shocked chatter. No species in recorded galactic history had simply refused the demands of a superior force without even attempting to negotiate. "No?" Chancellor Vexnari's crystalline form flickered with disbelief. "They simply said, no?" "There was more," Karath continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The human continued, "Furthermore, you have destroyed civilian infrastructure and caused the deaths of approximately 200,000 people with your little moon exploding stunt. We consider this an act of war. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from our system, or we will make you leave. Chen out." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Even the usually chattering delegation from the hive clusters had gone completely quiet. 30 minutes, repeated Counselor THYSSX slowly. "They gave you an ultimatum?" The arrogance was staggering, Karath admitted. Here was a species whose most advanced weapons were chemical rockets tipped with primitive nuclear devices, whose largest spacecraft couldn't even leave their own planetary system, and they were threatening us. "The Seventh Fleet has glassed entire star systems. We've brought civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia to their knees. And these humans were telling us to leave or they would make us." Ambassador Zekthara felt a chill run down her spine. She had studied human psychology during her graduate work at the Galactic University. Their species was unusual in many ways, but one thing that had always stood out was their complete inability to recognize when they were outmatched. Humans had a concept called courage that most galactic species found baffling and slightly insane. It was the tendency to continue fighting even when victory was impossible. "What did you do?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Standard protocol," Karath replied. "We demonstrated our power again. This time, we destroyed one of their major cities from orbit. A place called Tokyo. 12 million casualties, all infrastructure vaporized in seconds. Surely, we thought, this would bring them to their senses. And did it?" Karatha's laugh was bitter and hollow. 5 minutes later, we received another transmission. The same human female, but now she was smiling. That was when I knew we had made a terrible mistake. When a human smiles like that, it means they're about to do something that defies all logic, all self-preservation instincts, and all known laws of military strategy. The holographic display showed the second transmission. The human admiral was indeed smiling, but it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator that had just figured out how to turn the tables on something larger than itself. "Thank you for clarifying your intentions," Admiral Chen had said, her voice now carrying an edge that made several council members unconsciously step back from the display. "You have attacked civilian targets and murdered millions of innocent people. You want to know what makes humans different from the rest of the galaxy? We don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure that anyone who hurts us regrets it for the rest of their very short lives. You want a war? You've got one. But, don't say we didn't warn you. Within minutes, Karath continued, every human settlement, every space station, every primitive orbital platform began launching, everything. And, I mean everything. They launched communications satellites retrofitted with chemical explosives. They launched cargo containers filled with metal shards. They launched what appeared to be primitive nuclear devices strapped to rocket engines. They even launched their own people in small spacecraft, apparently with no intention of returning to the planet. Suicide attacks, gasped Representative Gloop, his gelatinous form quivering with shock. Not suicide, Karath corrected. That would imply they expected to die. These humans fully expected to live through it. They were just willing to take insane risks to hurt us. Their strategy, if you can call it that, seemed to be based on the principle that if they could make enough things explode at the same time, probability would eventually work in their favor. The Admiral paused, his four hands clenching and unclenching as he relived the memory. At first, it was almost amusing. Their weapons couldn't penetrate our shields, their ships were so primitive that our point defense systems were destroying them by the hundreds. But, they just kept coming. Wave after wave of them, each more insane than the last. Then, things got creative. They started attaching their nuclear devices to asteroids and flinging them at our ships. When we started shooting down the asteroids, they hollowed them out and put people inside with more nuclear devices, using the asteroid as a delivery system for boarding parties. When that didn't work, they started loading cargo ships with what they called kinetic penetrators, basically giant metal spears, and ramming our vessels at significant fractions of light speed. Counselor THYSSX mandibles clicked rapidly. Surely such primitive tactics couldn't pose a real threat to your fleet? That's what we thought, Karath replied grimly. But, humans have this disturbing tendency to turn everything into a weapon. We discovered that their primitive space stations were actually massive manufacturing facilities. While we were dealing with their initial assault, they were building more weapons. Bigger weapons. Weapons that shouldn't have been possible with their technology level. Such as? They somehow managed to construct what they called a mass driver, a magnetic acceleration system that could launch projectiles at nearly 10% of light speed. They built it in 18 hours using materials stripped from their own cities. When they fired it at our flagship, the projectile went through our shields like they weren't even there. The chamber erupted in disbelieving chatter. Such a weapon would require technology and manufacturing capabilities far beyond what their surveys had indicated the humans possessed. But, that's not the worst part, Karath continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. The worst part was when they figured out how to hack our communications networks. Ambassador Zekthara felt her blood freeze. They what? Somehow, using their primitive computer technology, they managed to break through our quantum-encrypted communication systems. Suddenly, every ship in the fleet was receiving what humans call rock music at maximum volume on all frequencies. But, it wasn't just random noise, they had somehow synchronized their attacks with the music. Every explosion, every impact, every boarding action was perfectly timed to the rhythm. They turned the destruction of our fleet into entertainment, Karath finished, his voice hollow with disbelief. We were being destroyed by a species that had turned warfare into a musical performance. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the chamber's life support systems. Finally, Chancellor Vexnari spoke. Admiral, you mentioned that your fleet was completely obliterated. Surely you're exaggerating for dramatic effect? Karatha's expression was grim. Honored Chancellor, of the original 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, 134 destroyers, and over 300 support vessels that entered the Sol system, exactly 7 ships escaped. 7. Out of a fleet that could have conquered entire star systems. And, the humans' losses? According to our final sensor readings before the retreat, they lost approximately 40% of their space-based infrastructure and, maybe a quarter of their orbital manufacturing capacity. They considered this a moderate success and immediately began rebuilding everything they had lost, only bigger and more heavily armed. Representative Gloop's form had gone completely still. How is this possible? Karath looked around the chamber, his reptilian features expressing something that might have been grudging respect mixed with absolute terror. Because, honored representatives, we have been thinking about warfare all wrong. We've spent millennia developing more efficient ways to defeat our enemies, more elegant solutions, more civilized approaches to conquest. Humans don't do civilized. They do effective. And they have discovered something that we forgot long ago. Which is, sometimes, the best way to win is to be willing to lose everything in the attempt. Humans don't fight to achieve victory. They fight to ensure that their enemies lose. There's a difference, and it's a difference that cost me the finest fleet in galactic history. As the implications of this began to sink in, Ambassador Zekthera realized that everything they thought they knew about the galaxy had just changed forever. Somewhere out there was a species that had just proved that superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and tactical superiority meant nothing if your enemy was crazy enough to ignore the rules of engagement entirely. And they had just announced their presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been adjourned 3 hours ago, but Ambassador Zekthera remained in the vast chamber, staring at the holographic displays that still showed the aftermath of humanity's impossible victory. The numbers didn't make sense. Nothing about this situation made sense. She had requested all available data on Earth and its inhabitants, and what she was reading challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about how civilizations developed. Dr. Mirthalin, the Council's chief xenobiologist, materialized beside her in a shimmer of quantum displacement. The ethereal being's form was constantly shifting between dimensions, making him appear as a vaguely humanoid outline filled with swirling stars. His species, the Vorthak, existed partially outside normal spacetime, which gave them a unique perspective on the development of life across the galaxy. Fascinating data, isn't it? Dr. Mirthalin said, his voice resonating from somewhere beyond the third dimension. I've been analyzing the biological and social profiles of these humans for the past several hours, and, I must say, I've never encountered anything quite like them. Zekthera gestured to the scrolling data streams around them. According to these reports, their homeworld should have prevented any intelligent life from evolving at all. The environmental stresses alone should have limited them to simple survival behaviors. How did they develop space travel? That's exactly what makes them so remarkable, Dr. Mirthalin replied, his form brightening with excitement. Look at their evolutionary history. Most species that achieve sentience do so on relatively stable worlds with predictable environmental conditions. We evolved logic, reason, and cooperation because our environments rewarded careful planning and social cohesion. He gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show Earth's geological and biological history. Earth is quite literally a death world. Massive extinction events every few million years. Extreme weather patterns. Tectonic activity that regularly reshapes the continents. An ecosystem based almost entirely on predation. Everything on that planet is either trying to eat everything else, or has evolved elaborate defenses against being eaten. Zekthera studied the data with growing amazement. Their ocean contains creatures that could devour our largest spacecraft. Their landmasses are populated with predators that hunt in coordinated packs. Even their plant life is frequently toxic or aggressive. How did they survive long enough to develop intelligence? They didn't just survive, Dr. Mirthalin said, his voice filled with what might have been awe. They thrived. And they did it by developing the most efficient cooperative hunting behaviors ever documented. Humans aren't just intelligent predators, they're pack hunters with the ability to modify their environment and their tools in real time to adapt to any threat. The display zoomed in on human historical records, showing the development of their civilization. Zekthera watched in fascination as the timeline unfolded. Unlike most species, which showed gradual, steady progress from primitive tool use to advanced technology, human development was marked by sudden leaps followed by apparent setbacks, then, even more dramatic advances. Look at this pattern, she said, pointing to a particularly chaotic period in human history. They developed agriculture, then, immediately began using it to support larger armies for more efficient warfare. They discovered metallurgy and instantly began making better weapons. They learned to harness electricity and, within decades, they were using it to power industrial manufacturing of military equipment. Every major technological breakthrough in human history has been immediately weaponized, Dr. Mirthalin agreed. But that's not even the most interesting part. Watch what happens when they face existential threats. The display shifted to show various crisis points in human history. Zekthera watched as natural disasters, diseases, and resource shortages struck the planet repeatedly. In each case, instead of the expected population decline and technological regression that such events caused in most species, humans showed the opposite pattern. They became more innovative, more cooperative, and more aggressive in their expansion. They don't just adapt to threats, she realized. They turn threats into opportunities for advancement. Exactly. Most species develop conflict avoidance behaviors when faced with potentially lethal situations. Humans develop conflict resolution behaviors. They don't avoid problems, they attack them directly, often using methods that appear completely insane to outside observers. Dr. Mirthalin highlighted a section of the data. Consider their approach to space exploration. Most species develop space travel gradually, over thousands of years, as a natural extension of their technological advancement. Humans developed space travel in less than a century because they were competing with each other. They turned exploration into warfare, and warfare into exploration. Their entire space program was motivated by the desire to drop nuclear weapons on each other more efficiently, Zekthera read from the historical data. They literally strapped themselves to controlled explosions and shot themselves into space because they thought it would help them win wars against other humans. And when they ran out of wars to fight on their own planet, they started looking for new challenges in space. Their entire technological development has been driven by a need to solve increasingly difficult problems through the application of controlled violence. Zekthera scrolled through more data, her amazement growing. According to this, they've never actually achieved global peace. Even now, with the galaxy threatening their existence, they're still fighting among themselves. But here's the remarkable part, Dr. Mirthalin said, his form pulsing with excitement. When faced with an external threat, they instantly unite. All their internal conflicts become irrelevant. They can go from actively trying to destroy each other to perfect cooperation in a matter of hours if they identify a common enemy. The display showed communications intercepts from Earth during the draconian attack. Zekthera watched in amazement as military forces from dozens of different nations, many of whom had been in active conflict with each other, seamlessly coordinated their responses to the alien invasion. They had no unified command structure, she observed. No central authority. How did they manage such effective coordination? Because they didn't need one. Human pack hunting behaviors are so deeply ingrained that they can form effective tactical units with complete strangers in minutes. They have an instinctive understanding of small unit tactics that takes most species centuries to develop. Dr. Mirthalin brought up tactical analyses of the battle. Look at their attack patterns. No two human units used the same approach, but they all supported each other perfectly. They were improvising in real time, adapting their strategies to exploit weaknesses they discovered during the battle, and sharing tactical innovations across their entire species almost instantaneously. How is that possible? Because they treat warfare as a cooperative creative activity. They don't just fight to win, they fight to learn. Every battle makes them better fighters. Every defeat teaches them new techniques. And they share knowledge with a speed and efficiency that our most advanced communication networks can't match. Zekthera studied the data on human psychology and social behavior. What she found there was even more disturbing than their military capabilities. According to these profiles, humans actually enjoy conflict. They have recreational activities based on simulated warfare. They create fictional scenarios specifically to practice dealing with impossible situations. They call it entertainment, Dr. Mirthalin confirmed. But it's actually continuous tactical training. They spend their leisure time learning how to overcome superior enemies using inferior resources. They've turned the development of increasingly creative problem-solving techniques into a form of play. The implications of this began to sink in. Zekthera realized that humanity hadn't just accidentally defeated the draconian Seventh Fleet. They had been preparing for exactly this type of conflict their entire lives, individually and as a species. "Show me their industrial capabilities," she requested. The display shifted to show Earth's manufacturing infrastructure. What Zekthera saw defied everything she knew about technological development. Human industrial systems were designed for rapid reconfiguration and maximum output under crisis conditions. They can convert civilian manufacturing to military production in a matter of days, she observed. Their entire industrial base is essentially a military reserve that happens to make consumer goods during peacetime. And, look at their redundancy systems, Dr. Murthalin added. They've distributed their critical infrastructure across their entire planet. You can't disable their industrial capacity without destroying their entire civilization, and, even then, they've proven they can rebuild faster than most species can destroy. Zekthera pulled up the post-battle reports from the few Draconian survivors. According to this, while they were fighting the Seventh Fleet, they were simultaneously expanding their manufacturing capabilities. They built more weapons during the battle than they started with. Because for humans, warfare isn't about using existing resources efficiently. It's about creating new resources faster than your enemy can destroy them. They don't just fight with what they have, they fight with what they can build while fighting. The more Zekthera studied human capabilities, the more concerned she became. This wasn't just an unusual species that had gotten lucky. This was a species that had evolved specifically to excel at exactly the type of large-scale organized violence that had defined galactic politics for millennia. "Dr. Murthalin," she said slowly, "what happens if humans decide they don't want to be part of our galactic civilization? What if they decide they'd rather conquer it?" The ethereal being's form flickered with what might have been concern. "That's exactly what I've been wondering. Look at their expansion patterns." The display showed human space activities over the past few decades. Even with their primitive technology, they had been steadily expanding their presence in their solar system. But, their approach was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Most species establish colonies to access resources or expand population centers, Dr. Murthalin explained. Humans establish what they call strategic positions. Every human installation in space is designed to support future military operations. They're not exploring space, Zekthera realized. They're conquering it. They've been treating their own solar system as enemy territory and building the infrastructure to defeat any opposition. And now they know they're not alone in the universe. They know there are thousands of species out there with technology superior to theirs. And, based on their first contact experience, they've concluded that galactic civilization is hostile. Zekthera felt a chill of genuine fear. They're going to try to conquer us. Not immediately, Dr. Murthalin said. But, inevitably. It's what they do. They identify threats and, then, they develop the capability to neutralize those threats permanently. They've just identified the entire galaxy as a threat. How long do we have? Dr. Murthalin's form brightened as he processed the data. Based on their historical development patterns and their current technological trajectory, I estimate they'll have interstellar capability within 50 years. Probably less, now that they know what they're working toward. And, then? Then, we'll discover what happens when a species that spent millions of years perfecting the art of warfare gains access to galactic technology and infrastructure. They won't just join galactic civilization, Ambassador. They'll replace it. Zekthera stared at the data streams surrounding her, each one confirming her growing realization that the galaxy had just encountered something unprecedented and terrifying. Humanity wasn't just another species to be catalogued and integrated into galactic society. They were a force of nature that had been evolving in isolation, developing capabilities that no one had thought possible. The Draconian attack hadn't been humanity's introduction to galactic warfare. It had been their graduation exam. And they had passed with honors. "We need to warn the Council," she said finally. "Warn them of what?" Dr. Murthalin asked. "That we've discovered a species that treats the impossible as a mild inconvenience? That they've just demonstrated they can defeat our most advanced military forces using technology we consider primitive? That they're currently building bigger and better weapons based on what they learned from that victory? Zekthara considered this. Maybe we should try to establish peaceful relations. Show them that not all galactic species are hostile. Dr. Mirthalin's laugh was a sound like distant thunder. Ambassador, I've been studying their communication patterns. They've already drawn their conclusions about galactic civilization. From their perspective, we're a galaxy full of species that have grown soft and complacent from millennia of peace. They see us as prey. But surely they'd be willing to negotiate. They just spent 6 months reverse engineering draconian technology from the wreckage of the 7th Fleet. They're not interested in joining our civilization, Ambassador. They're interested in replacing it with something more efficient. More human. As the full implications of humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage began to sink in, Zekthara realized that the galaxy was facing something it had never encountered before, a species that was better at warfare than the civilizations that had been practicing it for millennia. And they were just getting started. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of humanity's newest space station, watching the construction of what her engineers cheerfully called the galaxy's biggest middle finger to hostile aliens. The station, officially designated as Terra Defense Platform Alpha, was more commonly known among the crew as the Welcome Wagon, though the kind of welcome it offered would be decidedly unpleasant for any uninvited guests. 6 months had passed since the Draconian attack, and humanity had not been idle. The destruction of Tokyo had galvanized the human race in ways that the aliens couldn't possibly have anticipated. Instead of surrendering or retreating, humans had done what they always did when faced with an existential threat: they had gotten creative, angry, and extremely productive. Admiral, called out Commander Rodriguez from the tactical station, were receiving another transmission from the Galactic Council. It's the 4th one this week. Chen didn't look away from the construction display. Let me guess, they want to discuss terms for our peaceful integration into galactic society? That's the gist of it. They're promising protection from future attacks, access to advanced technology, and a seat on some kind of governing council. Chen finally turned around, her expression showing exactly what she thought of the Galactic Council's offers. Commander, what's the current status on Project Hades? The antimatter production facility is ahead of schedule. We should have our first batch of planet crackers ready for deployment within 3 months. And the FTL research? Dr. Peterson's team cracked the principles behind draconian warp drive technology last week. We're already building improved versions. First test flight is scheduled for next month. Chen nodded with satisfaction. Send a response to the council. Tell them we appreciate their offer, but we're currently busy preparing for the next invasion. If they'd like to discuss terms, they're welcome to come here and negotiate in person. Commander Rodriguez grinned. Should I mention that approaching Earth without prior authorization might result in immediate vaporization? That would be implied by the invitation. These aliens seem to have trouble understanding subtle communication, but they appear to be fluent in the language of overwhelming firepower. The truth was, humanity had learned far more from their brief encounter with galactic civilization than the Galactic Council realized. The wreckage of the Draconian fleet hadn't just provided them with advanced technology, it had given them a complete picture of how the galaxy operated, and humans had not been impressed. Dr. James Peterson, Earth's leading expert on xenotechnology, entered the command center carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone who had just discovered something particularly interesting. Admiral, we've finished analyzing the complete Draconian database. You're going to want to see this. Chen accepted the datapad and began scrolling through the information. What she found there confirmed her worst suspicions about galactic civilization. They've been at peace for over 3,000 years? Relative peace, Peterson corrected. They have conflicts, but they're all settled through formal declarations, limited engagements, and negotiated surrenders. Actual warfare, the kind where you fight until one side can't fight anymore, hasn't happened in their recorded history. No wonder they didn't know what to do when we refused to surrender, Chen mused. They've never encountered an enemy that actually intended to win. Peterson highlighted a section of the data. It gets worse. Look at their military doctrines. They're designed around demonstrating superiority, not achieving victory. The goal is to force surrender with minimal casualties and infrastructure damage. Efficient, Chen acknowledged. But completely ineffective against anyone who doesn't care about casualties. That's not even the most interesting part, Peterson continued, his excitement growing. Their entire civilization is built around avoiding conflict rather than winning it. They've developed elaborate diplomatic protocols, economic interdependencies, and social structures all designed to prevent war. Chen studied the data more carefully. The picture that emerged was of a galaxy that had achieved peace through the simple expedient of making war too expensive and complicated to conduct. Species were economically integrated to the point where attacking each other would be self-destructive. Diplomatic protocols required months or years of negotiations before hostilities could begin. Military forces were designed for show rather than substance. It was elegant, sophisticated, and completely vulnerable to anyone who didn't play by the rules. They've forgotten how to fight, she realized. Worse than that, Peterson said. They've forgotten that fighting is sometimes necessary. They assume that everyone wants the same things they do: peace, prosperity, and stability. They can't comprehend a species that values victory over survival. Chen turned back to the construction display, where hundreds of human spacecraft were working around the clock to build humanity's first line of defense. But defense, she knew, was just the beginning. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning that the best way to prevent future attacks was to make potential attackers very sorry they had ever considered such a thing. "What's our current intelligence on galactic military capabilities?" she asked. Commander Rodriguez pulled up the tactical analysis. Mixed bag. They have some impressive technology, their energy weapons are centuries ahead of ours, their ships are faster, and their manufacturing capabilities are enormous. But their strategic thinking is limited. How limited? They rely heavily on overwhelming technological superiority. Most galactic conflicts are decided by whoever has the better equipment rather than whoever uses their equipment more effectively. They don't really have concepts like asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, or strategic deception. Chen smiled grimly. In other words, they fight like we did before we learned better. Exactly. They're still thinking in terms of formal battles between equivalent forces. They're not prepared for enemies who cheat. And humans are very good at cheating, Chen observed. Peterson highlighted another section of the draconian database. There's something else, Admiral. The galactic economy is incredibly centralized. Most manufacturing, research, and resource extraction is concentrated in a few dozen heavily defended systems. If someone could disrupt those key nodes, the entire galactic civilization would collapse, Chen finished. They've optimized for efficiency rather than resilience. It gets better. Their communication networks, transportation systems, and even their governments are all interdependent. They've created a civilization that's incredibly advanced and completely fragile. Chen considered this information carefully. Humanity had just been handed the most detailed intelligence briefing in military history, courtesy of an enemy that had never considered the possibility that someone might actually study their weaknesses. How long until we have interstellar capability? Full FTL drive system should be operational within 6 months, Peterson replied. But, Admiral, if we're going to do what I think you're considering, we'll need more than just faster ships. Such as? We'll need to understand galactic politics, economics, and social structures well enough to predict how they'll respond to our actions. We'll need intelligence networks, diplomatic contacts, and probably a few allies among the galactic species. Chen nodded thoughtfully. What kind of allies? Peterson called up another section of the database. According to this, there are several species that have been having problems with the current galactic order. The Zalari Empire has been pushing for more aggressive expansion policies but keeps getting blocked by the Council. The Hive clusters feel like they're being discriminated against because of their collective consciousness. And there are dozens of minor species that feel like they're not getting fair representation in the galactic government. Potential recruiting opportunities, Chen observed. Exactly. Humans aren't the only species that might benefit from a change in galactic leadership. Commander Rodriguez looked up from his station. Admiral, we're receiving reports from our deep space monitoring stations. There's been a significant increase in alien traffic in nearby star systems. Looks like scouting missions. Chen wasn't surprised. They want to keep an eye on us without getting close enough for another unpleasant surprise. Should we do something about it? Not yet. Let them watch. Let them see exactly what we're building and wonder what we're planning to do with it. The truth was, Chen wanted the galaxy to see humanity's military buildup. She wanted them to worry, to argue among themselves about what to do about the human problem, and to gradually realize that their comfortable, peaceful civilization might not be as secure as they had believed. Peterson cleared his throat. Admiral, there's one more thing. The Draconian database contains detailed information about something called the pacification protocols. It's apparently a set of procedures for dealing with problematic species. Define problematic. Species that refuse to integrate peacefully into galactic civilization. According to this, it's been used 12 times in the past millennium. In every case, the target species was completely eliminated. Chen's expression hardened. Genocide. Highly efficient genocide, Peterson confirmed. They don't destroy planets or wipe out populations directly. They just make it impossible for the target species to maintain technological civilization. They destroy infrastructure, eliminate leadership, and force reversion to pre-industrial society. Then, they wait a few generations and try again with a more compliant population. And they're considering using these protocols against humanity? According to the intelligence we intercepted, it's being actively debated by the Galactic Council. Some factions want to try negotiation. Others think we're too dangerous to be allowed to develop further. Chen turned to Commander Rodriguez. What's the status on Project Damocles? The mobile platforms are almost ready. We can have a dozen of them positioned in key galactic systems within a year of achieving FTL capability. Chen nodded with satisfaction. Humanity's response to learning about the pacification protocols had been characteristically direct. If the galaxy was considering eliminating humanity, humanity would simply eliminate the galaxy first. Project Damocles involved positioning planet-killing weapons in orbit around every major galactic world, with deadman switches that would activate if Earth were ever attacked. It wasn't a peaceful solution, but humans had long ago learned that sometimes peace required the credible threat of overwhelming retaliation. What about our cultural exchange programs? Chen asked. Peterson smiled. Those are going better than expected. Apparently, several galactic species find human entertainment media absolutely fascinating. Our movies, books, and games are starting to circulate through their communication networks. And what are they learning from our entertainment? That humans consider impossible situations to be mild inconveniences, that we treat warfare as a form of problem solving, and that we have a disturbing tendency to win through methods that shouldn't work but somehow do. Chen laughed. So we're conducting psychological warfare through our fiction? Unintentionally, but yes. There's a growing movement among younger members of several species who think humanity's approach to problem solving is superior to traditional galactic methods. They're calling it human thinking. Excellent. If we can convince the galaxy that human methods work better than galactic methods, we won't have to conquer them. They'll join us voluntarily. As Chen looked out at the construction of humanity's expanding space infrastructure, she realized that the galaxy had made a critical error in attacking Earth. They had assumed that humans would react like any other species, with fear, submission, and a desire to avoid future conflict. Instead, they had awakened something that the galaxy was completely unprepared to handle, a species that viewed conflict as an opportunity for improvement and treated existential threats as interesting problems to solve. The galaxy wanted to integrate humanity into their peaceful civilization. But humanity had decided that what the galaxy really needed was an upgrade to something more efficient, more resilient, and more human. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been in continuous debate for 72 hours, and Ambassador Zekthera was beginning to understand why some species had evolved the ability to hibernate through difficult periods. The massive chamber buzzed with the agitated communications of 12,000 species, each trying to process the implications of humanity's latest transmission. High Chancellor Vexnari had called for order 17 times in the past hour alone, but the revelation of humanity's true capabilities had shattered the careful diplomatic protocols that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. The holographic displays around the chamber showed real-time intelligence reports from dozens of reconnaissance missions, and the picture they painted was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The humans have established 73 military installations throughout their solar system in the past 6 months, reported Intelligence Director Galactic, his 8-eyed insectoid head swiveling to address different sections of the chamber. Each installation appears to be capable of independent operation and mutual support. More concerning, they've been expanding their manufacturing capabilities exponentially. Representative THYSSLAN, speaking for the Crystalline Collective, pulsed with agitation. How is such rapid expansion possible? Even with our most advanced automated systems, establishing that much infrastructure would require decades. Because they're not using our methods, Dr. Murthalin replied from his position at the Scientific Advisory Panel. Human manufacturing is designed around the concept of good enough rather than perfect. They build quickly, then improve through iteration. It's incredibly inefficient by our standards, but it allows them to achieve massive scale in minimal time. Fleet Admiral Karath, who had somehow managed to retain his position despite the disaster of first contact, added grimly, "They're also using techniques we've never seen before. They've somehow learned to work in the vacuum of space without traditional life support systems. Our observers report humans operating in open space for hours at a time using nothing but primitive pressure suits." "Impossible," declared Councillor Vorthak of the Environmental Engineering Guild. "No oxygen-breathing species can survive prolonged vacuum exposure. Tell that to the humans who've been doing construction work on the dark side of their moon for the past 3 months, Karath replied. They've been building something they call a kinetic bombardment platform. According to our analysis, it's capable of accelerating projectiles to 15% of light speed." The chamber erupted in shocked chatter. Such a weapon would be capable of destroying planets, and humanity had built it using technology that the galaxy considered primitive. Ambassador Zekthera stood to address the assembly. "Honored colleagues, I believe we've been approaching this situation from the wrong perspective. We've been analyzing human capabilities using our own frameworks for understanding civilized behavior. But humans don't appear to operate according to any recognized patterns of civilized development." High Chancellor Vexnari's crystalline form pulsed with attention. "Explain." "Every species that achieves interstellar civilization follows similar patterns. We develop technology gradually, establish peaceful internal societies, and then expand cautiously into space. We avoid unnecessary risks, minimize casualties, and prioritize long-term stability over short-term gains." Zekthera gestured to the displays showing human activities. "Humans have done the opposite of everything we consider normal civilized behavior. They develop technology through constant warfare. They've never achieved internal peace, they're still fighting among themselves even while defending against external threats. And they expand into hostile environments specifically because those environments are dangerous." "Your point?" asked Representative Gloop. "My point is that we're not dealing with a species that wants to join galactic civilization. We're dealing with a species that represents a completely different approach to civilization itself." Dr. Murthalin's form brightened with realization. "She's right. Look at their social structures. Most civilized species develop hierarchical governments that prioritize stability and order. Human governments are designed to facilitate competition and change. They don't want stability, they want improvement." "But surely they must recognize the benefits of peaceful cooperation," insisted Councillor THYSSLAN. "They do," Zekthera replied. "But their definition of cooperation is different from ours. We cooperate to avoid conflict. They cooperate to win conflicts more efficiently." Intelligence Director Galactic brought up new data. This analysis is consistent with our latest intelligence reports. The humans have been studying our diplomatic communications, our economic systems, and our military doctrines. But they're not trying to understand how to integrate with them, they're looking for weaknesses. Weaknesses? High Chancellor Vexnari's tone carried a dangerous edge. According to our communication intercepts, they've identified what they call critical infrastructure dependencies throughout galactic civilization. Transportation networks, communication systems, manufacturing centers, resource extraction operations, they've mapped everything that keeps our society functioning. The implications of this began to sink in around the chamber. Humanity wasn't preparing to join galactic civilization, they were preparing to replace it. Fleet Admiral Koroth spoke up again. There's more. Our deep space reconnaissance has detected human ships conducting what appear to be exploration missions in nearby systems. But they're not exploring for resources or potential colonies. They're conducting military surveys. Surveying for what? Strategic positions. Choke points. Places where a small force could disrupt large-scale operations. They're thinking like an invasion force that plans to fight a galaxy-spanning war with limited resources. Representative Gloop's gelatinous form rippled with anxiety. Surely they realize they can't possibly win a conflict against the entire galaxy? We have thousands of worlds, millions of ships, and billions of years of accumulated knowledge. Dr. Mirthalen's laugh echoed strangely from his extra-dimensional existence. That's exactly what the draconian 7th Fleet thought. But humans don't fight the wars we expect them to fight. They fight the wars they think they can win. Ambassador Zekthera pulled up tactical analyses of historical human conflicts. Look at their military history. Humans have a documented pattern of defeating superior enemies through what they call asymmetric warfare. They don't meet strength with strength, they meet strength with creativity. Give us an example, requested Counselor Vorthak. During their Second World War, a technologically inferior human faction defeated a superior enemy by convincing them to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously while conducting economic warfare against their resource base. The superior force had better equipment, better training, and more initial advantages, but the inferior force had better strategic thinking. And you think they'll apply these same principles to galactic warfare? I think they've already started, Zekthera replied grimly. According to our cultural monitoring stations, human entertainment media has begun circulating among several galactic species. Our young people are watching human stories, playing human games, and adopting human problem-solving approaches. High Chancellor Vexnari's crystalline form flickered with concern. Are you suggesting they're conducting psychological warfare through their entertainment? I'm suggesting they understand something we've forgotten, that winning a war against a superior enemy requires convincing that enemy to defeat themselves. They're not trying to conquer us militarily. They're trying to convert us culturally. Intelligence Director Golthak confirmed this analysis with new data. We've been monitoring communication networks across the galaxy, and there's been a significant increase in what humans call viral content featuring human perspectives on problem-solving, conflict resolution, and social organization. Particularly concerning is the growing popularity of human concepts among species that have traditionally been dissatisfied with current galactic governance. Which species? The Zalari Empire has been adopting human-inspired military doctrines. The hive clusters have begun experimenting with human-style individual initiative within their collective structure. And several minor species have started requesting cultural exchange programs with humanity. Fleet Admiral Karotha's expression grew grim. They're building an alliance. Not through formal treaties or diplomatic agreements, but through cultural influence. It's worse than that, Dr. Mirthalen interjected. They're not just building an alliance, they're building a coalition of species that share their approach to problem solving. If this continues, we could see the emergence of an entirely new model of galactic civilization. High Chancellor Vexnari called for order as the chamber erupted in anxious discussion. What are our options? We could implement the pacification protocols, suggested Counselor This. Eliminate their technological base and wait for them to regress to pre-industrial levels. That would require a military operation that we're not certain we can conduct successfully, Admiral Karath pointed out. The humans have proven that our conventional military advantages may not be as decisive as we assumed. What about economic pressure? Asked Representative Gloop. We could embargo their system, prevent them from accessing galactic resources and technology. Ambassador Zekthara shook her head. That would only convince them that we're a threat to be eliminated rather than a civilization to be joined. And, based on their psychological profiles, external pressure tends to make humans more innovative rather than more compliant. Then, what do you suggest? Zekthara considered the situation carefully. I think we need to accept that our comfortable, stable galactic civilization is about to change whether we want it to or not. The question is whether we want to influence the change or simply react to it. You're suggesting we negotiate with them? I'm suggesting we learn from them. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that we thought were impossible. Instead of viewing them as a threat to our way of life, maybe we should consider the possibility that their way of life has advantages we've been overlooking. Dr. Mirthalen's form pulsed with agreement. The humans have achieved in decades what took us millennia. Their approach to problem solving, resource utilization, and technological development is demonstrably more efficient than ours. But, at what cost? Demanded Counselor Vorthak. Their society is chaotic, violent, and unpredictable. And incredibly effective, Zekthara countered. Maybe chaos, violence, and unpredictability aren't flaws to be corrected. Maybe they're features that produce results. High Chancellor Vexnari's crystalline form dimmed as she processed this radical suggestion. Are you proposing that we adopt human social and political models? I'm proposing that we seriously consider the possibility that 12,000 years of galactic peace may have made us too comfortable to deal with the challenges of an expanding universe. The humans represent a different approach to civilization, one that prioritizes adaptation over stability. And, if they decide that our approach to civilization is obsolete? Ambassador Zekthara looked around the chamber at the representatives of 12,000 species, all arguing about how to deal with a single species that had already demonstrated its ability to defeat their most advanced military forces. Then, I suspect they're going to prove it to us, whether we're ready for the lesson or not. As the debate continued, it became clear that the galaxy was facing something unprecedented in its history, a species that challenged not just their military supremacy, but their fundamental assumptions about how civilization should develop and interact. The comfortable certainties of galactic society were crumbling, and nobody quite knew what would replace them. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear: whatever came next, it was going to be very, very human. 2 years after first contact, Ambassador Zekthara stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Terra station, watching human and alien construction crews work together to build what would become the first integrated galactic defense platform. The sight still amazed her: beings from dozens of different species working side by side, using a combination of traditional galactic technology and revolutionary human techniques to create something neither could have achieved alone. The station itself was a testament to what humans called hybrid innovation. The elegant energy manipulation systems of the Crystalline Collective were integrated with human kinetic weapons systems. Draconian defensive screens protected manufacturing bays where human-designed automated systems produced components using Vorthak dimensional folding technology. It shouldn't have worked according to any known principles of technological integration, but it not only worked, it worked better than anything either civilization had previously achieved. The morning shift report, Ambassador, said Commander Jackson, the human liaison officer assigned to facilitate cooperation between galactic and human personnel. The young woman had adapted to working with alien species with typical human pragmatism, treating their various physiological and social requirements as interesting problems to solve rather than insurmountable obstacles. Zekthara accepted the datapad, noting that it was printed on actual paper, a human innovation that had proven surprisingly popular among galactic species who were accustomed to purely digital information systems. There was something comforting about physical documents that could be held, marked up, and referenced without technological interfaces. Production efficiency is up another 12%, she observed. How are the teams managing to improve so rapidly? Human approach to problem solving, Commander Jackson replied with a grin. Instead of perfecting each system before implementation, we're implementing working systems and, then, improving them continuously. The Zalari engineers love it, they get to see immediate results from their innovations instead of waiting for years of testing and approval. The transformation of galactic civilization over the past 2 years had been nothing short of revolutionary. What had begun as a tense standoff between humanity and the Galactic Council had evolved into something unprecedented, a voluntary restructuring of galactic society based on hybrid human-alien approaches to governance, technology, and social organization. It hadn't happened through conquest or coercion. Instead, humanity had simply demonstrated that their methods worked better, and, gradually, other species had begun adopting those methods voluntarily. Any word from the council session? Zekthara asked. Admiral Chen just transmitted the results of the vote, Commander Jackson replied. The Resource Allocation Reformation Act passed by a margin of 8,000 to 4,000, with 12 species abstaining. Zekthara shook her head in amazement. 2 years ago, such a radical reorganization of galactic economic policy would have been unthinkable. The act would decentralize resource distribution, eliminate the bureaucratic approval processes that had slowed galactic development for millennia, and implement human-style competitive allocation systems throughout galactic space. Any significant opposition? The usual suspects, species that benefited from the old inefficient systems, are upset about losing their advantages. But, even most of them admit that the new approach will produce better results overall. The truth was, humanity had won the most important victory possible. They had convinced the galaxy that human methods were superior without having to destroy galactic civilization to prove it. It had been a masterpiece of strategic thinking that most galactic species were only beginning to understand. Dr. Peterson emerged from one of the research laboratories, carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone who had just solved a particularly interesting puzzle. Ambassador, we've just completed the analysis of the latest technological integration project. You're going to want to see this. Zekthara accepted the report and began scanning through the technical data. What she found there was typical of human galactic cooperation projects, results that seemed impossible but worked perfectly in practice. You've successfully integrated Hive cluster collective processing with human individual creativity, she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Better than that, Dr. Peterson replied excitedly. We've created a hybrid consciousness system that preserves individual identity while enabling collective problem solving. The Hive clusters get to maintain their traditional group mind advantages, while human participants retain their capacity for individual innovation. And the results? The hybrid teams are solving complex engineering problems in hours that would normally take weeks. Individual creativity generates innovative approaches, collective processing evaluates and optimizes those approaches, then, individual initiative implements the solutions. It's like having the best of both evolutionary strategies working together. Commander Jackson pulled up additional data. It gets better. The Vorthak have been experimenting with integrating their extra-dimensional perception with human tactical thinking. They can now predict probable outcomes of strategic decisions with unprecedented accuracy. And the Crystalline Collective? They've combined their energy manipulation abilities with human weapons design. The results are... Commander Jackson paused, searching for the right words. Let's just say that anyone who threatens this alliance is going to have a very bad day. Zekthara considered the implications of these developments. Humanity hadn't just joined galactic civilization, they had catalyzed the evolution of galactic civilization into something entirely new. Species that had coexisted peacefully but separately for millennia were now actively collaborating, sharing technologies and capabilities that none of them could have developed alone. What about the holdout species? Dr. Peterson's expression grew more serious. That's where things get interesting. The species that have refused to participate in the integration process are finding themselves increasingly isolated. Not through any deliberate exclusion, but simply because the collaborative approach is producing such superior results that non-participating species can't compete. Are they becoming hostile? Some of them, Commander Jackson admitted. The hegemony of pure thought has been making threats about genetic contamination and cultural corruption.
They seem to think that human influence is somehow degrading the purity of galactic civilization.
Zekthara wasn't surprised. The hegemony represented the most extreme conservative faction in galactic politics, believing that their ancient ways were inherently superior to any innovation. They had opposed every major social development in galactic history and viewed humanity as the ultimate threat to their vision of eternal stasis.
What's our response? Standard human approach, Dr. Peterson replied with a smile.
We're ignoring their complaints and continuing to prove that our methods work better.
They can either adapt or become irrelevant. This was perhaps the most fundamentally human aspect of the new galactic order, the assumption that competence would eventually triumph over ideology.
Species that contributed effectively to the collective effort were welcomed and supported. Species that didn't contribute were left alone to pursue their own approaches, but they couldn't expect to receive the benefits of cooperation without participating in it.
Admiral Chen's voice came over the station's communication system, addressing all personnel.
Attention all staff, we've just received confirmation that the first joint human-alien deep space exploration mission has successfully established contact with a previously unknown species in the Outer Rim territories. The new species, which calls itself the Symbiotic Collective, has expressed interest in joining our alliance after observing our approach to interspecies cooperation.
Zekthara smiled.
Humanity's approach to expanding their influence was characteristically direct. Instead of conquest or coercion, they simply demonstrated superior results and let other species draw their own conclusions. It was proving to be remarkably effective.
How many species are now part of the alliance? She asked.
Commander Jackson consulted her datapad. As of this morning, we have formal cooperation agreements with 6,347 species. Another 2,000 are in various stages of integration negotiations, and we're receiving new applications for membership every day.
And the Council's response?
High Chancellor Vexnari announced yesterday that the Council is officially transitioning from a governing body to an advisory organization. The new Alliance Council will take over most administrative functions, using human-inspired democratic procedures rather than traditional consensus-based decision-making. Dr. Peterson added, the most interesting development is that species are voluntarily reforming their internal social structures to be more compatible with Alliance standards. The Zalari Empire has implemented individual rights protections.
The Crystalline Collective has established procedures for minority opinions.
Even the Draconian Empire has begun experimenting with what they call democratic militarism.
Zekthara found this fascinating.
Humanity had achieved what conquerors throughout galactic history had failed to accomplish. They had convinced other species to change themselves voluntarily. Not through force or coercion, but through the simple expedient of proving that change would produce better results.
What about Earth itself? She asked. How are humans adapting to galactic integration? Commander Jackson laughed.
That might be the most remarkable part of this whole situation.
Humans are treating the integration of galactic civilization like just another interesting engineering challenge.
They're not trying to impose human culture on alien species, they're trying to optimize the combination of all available cultures for maximum effectiveness.
Give me an example. Food production.
Humans have combined their agricultural techniques with hive cluster collective coordination, crystalline energy systems, and Vortex dimensional storage. The result is agricultural productivity that exceeds anything any single species ever achieved, while maintaining the nutritional preferences and cultural significance of traditional foods for every participating species.
Dr. Peterson brought up additional examples. Transportation systems integrate human mechanical engineering with alien propulsion technologies. Communication networks combine human information theory with alien telepathic capabilities.
Even entertainment has become a hybrid of human storytelling techniques and alien artistic expressions.
And the human's reaction to working with alien species? Typical human adaptation, Commander Jackson replied.
They treat aliens like just another type of human with interesting capabilities and different requirements. They're more concerned with figuring out how to optimize cooperation than they are with cultural differences. As Zekthara considered the transformation that had swept through galactic civilization, she realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. They had created a civilization that was simultaneously more diverse and more unified than anything that had come before. Species maintained their individual characteristics and cultural identities while working together more effectively than any previous alliance.
Administrator Zekthera, came a voice from the station's communication system. You have an incoming transmission from Earth. Priority Alpha.
She moved to a private communication alcove and activated the connection. The holographic display showed Admiral Chen, calling from what appeared to be a massive construction facility.
Ambassador, Chen said without preamble, we've just received intelligence that concerns both human and galactic security. You need to see this.
The display shifted to show sensor readings from the edge of galactic space. What Zekthera saw there made her blood freeze.
A massive fleet of ships unlike anything in galactic databases was approaching from intergalactic space.
The vessels were enormous, heavily armed, and clearly designed for large-scale military operations. First contact protocol suggests they're from another galaxy entirely, Chen continued. Based on their approach vector and formation, they appear to be a conquest fleet.
Estimated arrival in galactic space, 6 months. Zekthera stared at the data, realizing that galactic civilization was about to face its first truly external threat in recorded history. What's our response? Admiral Chen's smile was predatory and confident.
Ambassador, for the first time in galactic history, we have 12,000 species working together using optimized hybrid technologies and coordinated strategic thinking. Whatever these invaders think they're going to find when they get here, they're going to be very, very disappointed. As Zekthera ended the transmission, she realized that the galaxy was about to discover what happened when an optimized human-alien hybrid civilization faced an external threat. The invaders thought they were attacking a collection of peaceful, civilized species. Instead, they were about to encounter something unprecedented, a galaxy full of species that had learned to think like humans while retaining all their individual capabilities. The peaceful galaxy that humanity had first encountered 2 years ago was gone forever. In its place was something new, something stronger, and something that combined the best elements of 12,000 different approaches to civilization under the leadership of a species that treated impossible situations as interesting problems to solve. The invaders were about to learn why the galaxy now whispered a new phrase in fearful reverence: never underestimate a species that considers nuclear weapons to be acceptable camping equipment. And they were about to discover what happened when that species had 11,999 friends who shared their approach to problem solving.